In the cold vacuum of space, where stars died in violent whispers and civilizations measured their existence in millennia, there existed worlds that even the bravest souls dared not approach. They called them Deathworlds, planets where the very ground breathed poison, where the rain fell as acid, and the wildlife evolved not just to survive but to hunt, to kill, to consume anything foolish enough to set foot on cursed soil. For 3,000 years the Galactic Confederation had catalogued these nightmare worlds, marking them with crimson warnings that meant only one thing: stay away or die. The Zilthani had tried first. Their crystalline forms, evolved from silicon-based life on tidally locked worlds, had lasted exactly 14 minutes on Zurian Prime before the atmospheric sulfur dissolved their molecular bonds. Lahorth Keel, those proud warrior philosophers whose ancestors had conquered black holes, sent their finest champions to Venom's edge. The planet sent back pieces. Deathworlds broke everything they touched. But in a quiet corner of the galaxy, on a small blue-green world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, there lived a species that had never learned the meaning of the word impossible. They called themselves humans. Commander Lila Rodriguez pressed her palm against the cold metal viewport of the UES Persistence, watching as the planet rotated slowly below them. Crimson storms swirled across continents that looked like open wounds, while lightning the color of molten copper split the thick, roiling atmosphere. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she whispered. Behind her, Dr. James Okafor nearly choked on his coffee. "Commander, with all due respect, that's Hadean's Rest. The atmosphere is 90% methane and carbon dioxide. The surface temperature averages 200 degrees Celsius. The flora produces neurotoxins that can kill most life forms through skin contact alone." Lila smiled. The kind of smile that had gotten her through the Martian Rebellion, the Titan mining wars, and 3 separate court-martial proceedings. "Sounds like Houston in August. The geological surveys show active volcanic chains across 70% of the landmass." Okafor continued, his voice rising. "Seismic activity that would register as apocalyptic on Earth. And the wildlife." He shuddered. The Galactic Confederation lost an entire research expedition. They found pieces of their ships embedded in what they thought was bedrock. It was actually some kind of living armor plating. "Jim." Lila turned from the viewport, her dark eyes gleaming with something that made seasoned veterans take a step back. "How long have we been searching for a new home?" 47 years since Earth's evacuation. 47 years drifting between the stars, begging for scraps of habitable worlds already claimed by species that evolved when our ancestors were still figuring out fire. Her voice carried the weight of every refugee ship, every failed colony, every child born in the cold vacuum between worlds. The Confederation offers us their garden worlds. Little plots of tamed, sanitized paradise where we can exist quietly, gratefully, and never truly live. She gestured toward the planet below. "But this is ours for the taking. No one else wants it. No one else can have it. Because it's a death trap," Chief Engineer Tommy Kowalski interjected from his workstation. "The radiation alone would cook us in our suits." "The radiation would cook them," Lila corrected. "We're not them." The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of life support systems. Outside, Hadean's Rest continued its violent dance, storms that could swallow continents raging across its scarred surface. Navigation Officer Diana Chen. No. Lila reminded herself. Chen was a forbidden name in their databases now. Looked up from her instruments. "Commander, I'm reading massive electromagnetic interference from those storms. Our landing pods won't be able to navigate in that soup. Then we go in dark. Manual piloting, visual navigation only." "Ma'am," Dr. Okafor's voice cracked slightly. "That's suicide." Lila walked to the center of the bridge, her boots clicking against the metal deck plating. Around her, the crew of the Persistence, refugees, rebels, and dreamers all watched with the kind of desperate hope that had carried humanity across impossible distances. 50,000 people are on this ship," she said quietly. 50,000 souls who've never seen a sunrise that wasn't filtered through artificial atmosphere. Children who've never felt real soil under their feet, breathed air that didn't come from recyclers, or tasted water that wasn't processed through machines older than they are. She paused, letting her words sink in. The Confederation calls these Deathworlds because they think in terms of survival, staying alive long enough to reproduce and pass on genes. They've forgotten what it means to truly live. The commander activated the ship's general communications system. Throughout the vessel, in corridors and workshops and sleeping quarters, her voice echoed through speakers worn smooth by decades of use. "This is Commander Rodriguez. In 1 hour, we begin preliminary landing operations on Hadean's Rest. I won't lie to you. This world will try to kill us. The air is poisoned, the ground is fire, and everything that lives there evolved to hunt, kill, and feast on anything stupid enough to challenge it." She smiled, though no one could see it through the audio-only transmission. "We're going to build a barbecue pit." Deep Space Monitoring Station Cothamore 7. Surveillance Coordinator Brixthul's 4 eyes dilated in sequence as the translation matrix processed the human transmission. Around him, the station's crew, a mixture of hidden diplomats, crystalline researchers, and etheric energy beings, stopped their various activities to stare at the massive holographic display. "Did the translation matrix malfunction?" asked Sub-Coordinator Yilthanine, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that indicated confusion in her species. "Negative. I ran the transmission through 17 different linguistic processors. The human command structure has declared their intention to—" Brixthul paused, his vocal apparatus struggling with the concept, "construct a food preparation device. On a Class Omega Deathworld." The station fell silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems designed for a dozen different atmospheric requirements. "Alert the Confederation Council," Yilthan whispered, and prepare the memorial protocol." But Brixthul was already composing his report, his claws clicking against the crystalline control surfaces as he tried to find words in galactic standard for what he was witnessing. How do you explain to a civilization that had never known true hunger, never fought for survival, never dreamed of impossible things, that somewhere in the depths of space, a dying species had looked at hell itself and decided to invite friends over for dinner? The humans were descending toward Hadean's Rest, their primitive vessels glowing like falling stars against the crimson storm clouds. And for the first time in his 2-century career monitoring the deadliest regions of known space, Brixthul felt something that his species had no word for: fear. Surface of Hadean's Rest Landing Zone Alpha. The first drop pod hit the surface of Hadean's Rest with the impact of a small meteor, sending up a geyser of superheated rock and crystallized atmosphere. Inside, strapped into acceleration couches that had seen better decades, Sergeant Major Rosa Delgado felt every bone in her body compress as the pod's emergency thrusters fired in a desperate attempt to arrest their descent. Thump. The pod settled with a groan of stressed metal, then went silent except for the steady ping-ping-ping of cooling hull plates. "Sound off," Delgado called out, her voice slightly hoarse from the G-forces. "Kowalski, alive and pissed off. Clark, present and accounted for. Rodriguez here, and I think I swallowed my teeth during re-entry." "Wait." Delgado blinked. "Commander, you weren't supposed to be on the first wave?" "Change of plans, Sergeant Major. Someone needs to make sure you maniacs don't get yourselves killed in the first 5 minutes." The pod's external sensors came online, filling their helmet displays with readings that made no sense to anyone who'd grown up on normal worlds. Surface temperature 98 degrees Celsius. Atmospheric pressure 4.7 times Earth normal. Air composition 67% methane, 21% carbon dioxide, 9% sulfur compounds, 3% trace gases that their computers couldn't identify. "Radiation's actually not as bad as we thought," reported Dr. Amanda Foster, the expedition's xenobiologist. "Only about 12 times lethal by Confederation standards. Practically a health spa," Delgado grinned, checking her weapon systems. "Suits are holding steady. Environmental protection is green across the board." Through the pod's small viewport, the surface of Hadean's Rest stretched away like a vision from humanity's most ancient nightmares. The ground was a mixture of black volcanic glass and what looked like organic polymer, some kind of living rock that pulsed with bioluminescent veins. In the distance, geysers of superheated gas erupted from fissures that glowed like the mouths of furnaces. And moving between the lava flows, shapes that defied easy description. creatures that looked like they'd been assembled from nightmares and given claws. "Jesus Christ," whispered Private Jake Morrison, the team's communications specialist. "What the hell lives out there?" "According to the Confederation's files," Foster said, consulting her tablet, "the local fauna includes something called thermic stalkers, quadrupedal hunters that can survive in molten rock. Acid wraiths that exist in a state somewhere between gas and liquid, and something the translation protocols can't properly render. But the closest approximation is the hunger that walks." "Sounds like my ex-wife," Kowalski muttered. "Can it, Tommy?" Delgado snapped, but there was affection in her voice. These people were her family, the only family any of them had left since Earth's evacuation. "Foster, what's the atmospheric composition outside our immediate landing zone?" "Toxic to everything in the known galaxy," Foster replied cheerfully. "The methane alone would kill most species in minutes. The sulfur compounds would dissolve their tissues, and there's something else in the air, organic compounds, that seem to actively seek out and attack foreign proteins." "In other words," Commander Rodriguez said over the comm, "perfect for humans who grew up eating gas station food and breathing Los Angeles smog." Delgado felt a familiar rush of pride and terror. Humanity had always thrived in places that should have killed them. They'd conquered Arctic ice that could freeze flesh in seconds, deserts that could cook a person alive, and deep ocean trenches where the pressure would crush most life forms into paste. But this was different. This wasn't just surviving. This was claiming a world that had been written off by every major civilization in the galaxy. "All right, people," she said, activating the pod's exit sequence. "We've got about 6 hours of air in these suits, and a whole lot of real estate to survey. Let's see what this hellscape has to offer." The pod's doors hissed open, releasing a small puff of internal atmosphere that was instantly devoured by the alien environment. As the first human beings in galactic history stepped onto the surface of Hadean's Rest, the very ground seemed to tremble beneath their feet. Not from seismic activity, Foster realized, monitoring her instruments with growing excitement. The planet's responding to our presence, the organic components in the rock. They're reacting to our biosignatures. "Commander," she called over the comm, "I think the planet knows we're here." And in the distance, something that might have been a mountain began to move. Galactic Confederation Emergency Session Council Chambers. Station Nexus Prime. High Counselor Temmarion's crystalline form resonated with frequencies that indicated deep distress as she reviewed the surveillance reports flooding in from the Outer Rim monitoring stations. Around the circular chamber, representatives from 43 species sat in various states of shock, confusion, and in a few cases what could only be described as morbid fascination. "Let me ensure that I understand the situation correctly," she said, her harmonic voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "The human refugee fleet has landed on Hadean's Rest, a Class Omega Deathworld that has killed every expedition sent to its surface." "Confirmed, High Counselor," reported Intelligence Coordinator Sashun, his tentacles writhing with anxiety. 17 separate contact attempts with various landing teams. No response. "Given the lethal nature of the environment, we can only assume that they're dead," interrupted Diplomatic Envoy Kriltoth from the Merchant Guild. "Which solves our human refugee problem rather neatly." A low murmur ran through the chamber, some agreement, some dissent, but mostly just the sound of beings trying to process the magnitude of what they were witnessing. "Except," Sashabin continued, his voice rising above the murmur, "they're not dead." "Silence. Explain," High Counselor Thupmanrian commanded. The chamber's central hall projector activated, displaying a three-dimensional map of Hadean's Rest's primary continent. Scattered across the hellish landscape, dozens of red dots pulsed steadily. "These are human settlement sites," Sashivan said, "established within the first 72 hours of planetary contact. Each one is showing signs of active construction, power generation, atmospheric modification." "Impossible," breathed Counselor Vexthera, her arthropod form clicking with agitation. "The atmospheric composition alone should have dissolved their protective equipment. The radiation levels should have cooked their organic tissues. The local fauna is being hunted," Sashin interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Intelligence reports from our deep space monitoring posts indicate that the humans are actively pursuing, capturing, and he paused, struggling with the translation matrices, consuming the local wildlife. The chamber erupted in sounds that no translation protocol could adequately render. Horror, disbelief, and from a few species that still remembered their own predatory origins. Something that sounded almost like approval. High Counselor Thicmarion waited for the noise to subside, then spoke in frequencies that cut through the chaos like a crystalline knife. "Show me." The whole projector's image shifted, zooming in on one of the human settlements. What they saw defied every principle of xenobiology, planetary colonization, and common sense that the Confederation had developed over 3 millennia. The humans had built their colony directly on top of a lava flow. Their structures, clearly temporary but somehow holding together, were surrounded by what appeared to be defensive positions. But instead of typical military fortifications, the humans had constructed ovens, large, crude, but undeniably functional cooking devices that were currently roasting what looked like the remains of several thermic stalkers. "By the ancient lights," whispered Councillor Horthfall, the eldest member of the chamber, "they're having a feast." And as if to confirm his words, the surveillance feed's audio pickups transmitted something across the void of space that no civilization in galactic history had ever heard on a Deathworld. Laughter, human laughter, loud and bright and impossibly alive, echoing across a landscape that should have been their tomb. Settlement Alpha. Haitians rest 72 hours after initial landing. Commander Rodriguez wiped sweat from her forehead as she supervised the construction of humanity's first permanent structure on Haitian's Rest, a mess hall that could accommodate 50 people and cook enough food to feed twice that number. The building itself was a masterpiece of human improvisation, salvaged hull plating from the drop pods, crystallized atmospheric gases serving as mortar, and a foundation built directly into the living rock that seemed to pulse with the planet's strange heartbeat. Temperatures holding steady at 198 Celsius, reported Chief Engineer Kowalski, consulting readings on his environmental tablet. "The atmospheric processors are working overtime, but we're maintaining breathable air inside the structures." "What about the local wildlife?" Rodriguez asked, watching as Sergeant Major Delgado directed a team in dragging what looked like a cross between a crocodile and a blast furnace toward the cooking pits. "That's the weird part," Kowalski said, scratching his head through his helmet. "They keep attacking our perimeter, but—" He gestured toward the cooking area, where Dr. Foster was taking detailed notes while several team members prepared their latest catch for the evening meal. "They're actually pretty tasty once you get past the fact that they breathe fire and have acidic blood." Rodriguez followed his gaze to where Private Morrison was carefully filleting something that looked like it had been designed by a committee of demons with advanced degrees in biological warfare. The creature's hide was still glowing with residual heat, and its internal organs seemed to shift color as Morrison worked. "How's it taste?" she called out. Morrison looked up, his face visible through his helmet's transparent faceplate, and grinned. "Like barbecue, ma'am. Really, really angry barbecue." The commander felt a familiar warmth in her chest, not from the planetary environment but from something that had been missing from human life for too long. Hope, for the first time since Earth's evacuation. Her people weren't just surviving. They weren't huddled in refugee camps or scratching out an existence on the margins of someone else's world. They were thriving. "Commander," Dr. Foster called out from her research station, "you need to see this." Rodriguez made her way across the compound, stepping carefully around construction equipment and dodge a team carrying building materials that still glowed from the planet's internal heat. "What you got, Doc?" Foster gestured toward a collection of specimens she'd gathered from the local area. Samples of the living rock, atmospheric condensation, and various biological materials from their hunting expeditions. "The planet isn't trying to kill us," she said, her voice filled with scientific wonder. "It's testing us." "Come again?" "Look at these readings." Foster activated her tablet, displaying a complex series of chemical analyses. "The atmospheric composition changes based on our activities. When we first landed, the sulfur content was at lethal levels. But as we've established our presence, built our structures, started cooking—" She paused, checking her data again. "The air is getting more breathable, not by much, but measurably." Rodriguez stared at the readings, her mind racing through the implications. "The planet is adapting to us?" More than that, it's negotiating with us. Foster pointed toward the cooking pits where their latest catch was slowly roasting over carefully controlled flames. Every time we successfully hunt one of the local predators, the environmental hostility decreases slightly. It's like the planet is saying, if you can prove you belong here, I'll make it a little easier. And if we can't prove we belong. Foster gestured toward the distant horizon, where the remains of failed Confederation expeditions still littered the landscape, twisted metal and crystalline debris that the planet's ecosystem had already begun to dissolve. Then it eats us. Rodriguez nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. This wasn't just a colonization mission anymore. This was a challenge issued by a world that had spent millions of years perfecting the art of eliminating anything weak enough to be eliminated. But they'd never met humans before. "Doc," she said quietly, "how long before the Confederation figures out what we're doing here? Based on their surveillance patterns? They already know. The question is what they're going to do about it." Rodriguez looked around at her people. Engineers building impossible structures. Scientists studying creatures that shouldn't exist. Soldiers turned hunters learning to track prey that could melt steel with their breath. All of them working together with the kind of desperate determination that had carried humanity across the stars. "Let them come," she said. "We'll cook for them too." But even as she said it, Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that their real challenges were just beginning. In the distance, the planet's twin moons were rising, casting strange shadows across the volcanic landscape, and in those shadows, something vast and ancient stirred, something that had been waiting for new challengers to test its world's deadly embrace, the hunger that walks. Personal log, Dr. Amanda Foster, Day 4, Settlement Alpha. The biodiversity here is unlike anything in the galactic database. We've cataloged 17 distinct species of what I can only call thermal predators. Creatures that not only survive in extreme heat, but actually seem to require it for their biological processes. Most fascinating is their apparent intelligence. They're not just attacking randomly, they're probing our defenses, testing our responses, learning our patterns. It's almost like they're conducting their own research on us. The thermic stalkers we encountered yesterday showed clear evidence of tool use. They'd modified volcanic glass into cutting implements and were using coordinated hunting strategies that suggest complex communication. But here's the truly remarkable part. They're learning from our victories. Each hunting party that returns successful brings back more than just meat. They bring data, information about human tactics, human biology, human weaknesses. I think we may have stumbled onto the first truly intelligent Deathworld ecosystem. A planet that doesn't just kill intruders, but studies them first. And somehow, against all odds, we're passing its tests. For now, the planet trembled beneath humanity's feet. Ancient intelligences stirring in the depths of volcanic chambers. In the darkness between the stars, the Galactic Confederation watched and waited, their greatest warships already moving toward the impossible sight of humans thriving where everything else had died. But on Hadean's Rest, around fires that burned with alien fuels and cooked meat from creatures out of nightmares, 50,000 refugees had found something they'd lost when Earth fell, a home worth fighting for. The barbecue war was about to begin. Galactic Confederation War Council. 3 weeks after first human contact with Hadean's Rest, Fleet Admiral Korvax stood before the largest tactical display in Confederation space, his 8 arms weaving complex patterns as he manipulated holographic representations of star systems, fleet positions, and threat assessments. Behind him, the assembled war leaders of 43 species sat in silence that carried the weight of 3 millennia of galactic peace. "The situation has escalated beyond our initial projections," he began, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that indicated grave concern in his species. "What began as a simple refugee disposal," he caught himself, mandibles clicking in embarrassment, "relocation mission has become something entirely unprecedented." The tactical display shifted, showing a real-time orbital view of Hadean's Rest, where 3 weeks ago there had been empty wasteland punctuated by the twisted remains of failed expeditions. Now dozens of human settlements dotted the hellish landscape like tiny stars. Intelligence reports confirmed 17 functioning colonies with 3 more under construction. Admiral Korvax continued. Total human population on planet has reached 47,000 individuals. with more arriving daily from their fleet. Impossible, interrupted General Thexmorian of the Horthkeel warrior caste. No species can survive extended exposure to Class Omega environmental conditions. Their life support systems should have failed within hours. That's just it, the Admiral replied, manipulating the display to show detailed scans of the human settlements. They're not using life support systems. They're breathing the atmosphere. The council chamber erupted in sounds that translation protocols couldn't adequately render. Clicks, whistles, harmonic resonances, and in one case what sounded like choking. Show them the metabolic analysis, demanded Councillor Yithvel, her crystalline form flickering with agitation. The display shifted again, showing detailed biological scans of human colonists. The data that appeared made several council members physically recoil from their viewing stations. Their cellular structure has begun adapting to the environmental conditions, Admiral Korvax explained, his voice barely above a whisper. Enhanced thermal resistance, modified respiratory systems, improved toxin processing. In 3 weeks, they've demonstrated biological adaptation that should take millennia. Evolution doesn't work that fast, protested Chief Science Advisor Quelix. No species can modify its fundamental biology in real time. Humans can, came a new voice from the chamber's entrance. Every head, pseudopod, optical sensor, and sensory cluster turned toward the speaker. Ambassador Zilthanara, the Confederation's foremost expert on primitive species and one of the few beings alive who had studied humanity's refugee populations. Ambassador, High Counselor Thekmanirian's crystalline form resonated with surprise. We did not summon you to this session. No, Zilthanara replied, her four-legged form clicking across the chamber's polished floor. But you should have. She moved to the central display, her manipulator appendages interfacing directly with the holographic controls. You're thinking about this wrong, she said as new data began flooding the display. You're trying to understand humans through the lens of normal galactic biology. But humans aren't normal. The display now showed comparative evolutionary data, thousands of species across millions of years of development. Their adaptation rates, survival strategies, and biological flexibility plotted in neat, predictable curves. And then, like a spike driven through the heart of every scientific principle they'd ever known, humanity's data appeared. They don't evolve, Zilthanara explained. They adapt in real time. Their bodies, their cultures, their technologies, everything changes to meet whatever challenge they're facing. But that's, began Councillor Vexthara. Impossible? Unnatural? A violation of everything we understand about biological systems? Zilthanara's optical clusters focused on each council member in turn. Yes, that's exactly what it is, and that's what makes them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Admiral Korvax manipulated the display to show recent surveillance footage from Hadean's Rest. The images that appeared would haunt the council members' dreams for years to come. Humans walking across lava flows without protective gear. Human children playing games that involved dodging geysers of superheated poison. Human adults casually cooking meals over volcanic vents while creatures that could dissolve steel watched from the shadows. They're not just surviving, Zilthanara continued. They're thriving. And more importantly, they're turning a Deathworld into something else entirely. What do you mean? High Counselor Thekmarian asked. The display shifted to show atmospheric readings from across Hadean's Rest's primary continent. The data revealed something that should have been impossible. The planetary environment was changing. Oxygen levels increasing by 0.003% daily, Zilthanara read from the display. Methane content decreasing. Sulfur compounds being converted to less toxic variants. The humans aren't just adapting to the planet, they're terraforming it through their presence alone. Ha, whispered General Thexmorian. Zilthanara activated a new section of the display, showing detailed analysis of human biological processes on Hadean's Rest. Their digestive systems are processing the local fauna and converting toxic compounds into beneficial nutrients. Their respiratory systems are filtering atmospheric poisons and exhaling modified compounds. Their waste products are actually improving soil conditions. She paused, letting the implications sink in. In 3 weeks, they've begun converting a Class Omega Deathworld into something approaching a habitable planet. Not through technology, not through terraforming equipment, through their own bodies. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Finally, Admiral Korvax spoke. "What are you recommending, Ambassador?" Zildanara's form shifted, indicating a decision that went against every instinct her species had developed over millions of years of peaceful existence. "Or," she said simply, "before they get stronger. Settlement Alpha, Edian's Rest." The same day, Dr. Foster wiped perspiration from her forehead as she studied the latest biological samples under her portable analyzer. Around her, the sound of construction filled the air, humans building, always building, creating something from nothing with the kind of desperate ingenuity that had carried them across the stars. "The cellular modifications are accelerating," she called out to Commander Rodriguez, who was supervising the construction of their newest project, a communications array designed to maintain contact with the fleet ships still in orbit. "Good news or bad news?" Rodriguez replied, not looking up from the technical schematics. "Both. The good news is that our people are developing resistance to pretty much everything this planet can throw at us. Enhanced healing, improved toxin resistance, increased thermal tolerance. In a few more weeks, we'll be able to survive here without any protective gear at all." "And the bad news?" Foster hesitated, staring at the data that had been keeping her awake for 3 straight nights. "The changes might not be reversible, and they're happening too fast to be natural." That got Rodriguez's attention. She handed off the schematics to Chief Kowalski and walked over to Foster's research station. "Explain." "Look at this." Foster activated her display, showing comparative biological scans of the same individuals taken 3 weeks apart. Tommy Kowalski's lung capacity has increased by 37%. His liver is processing toxins at rates that should be physiologically impossible. His bone density has increased to the point where he could probably survive falls that would kill a normal human. Sounds like an improvement. It would be if we understood what was causing it. Foster switched to a different data set. But it's not just physical changes. Cognitive enhancements, improved reflexes, heightened sensory perception, and the children. She trailed off, staring at readings that challenged everything she'd learned in 20 years of studying human biology. "What about the children?" Rodriguez asked quietly. "They're adapting faster than the adults." "Much faster." Little Jake Morrison, 8 years old, was playing near the lava pools yesterday. Without protective gear, his skin temperature was 112 degrees Fahrenheit. And he was laughing. Rodriguez felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature. Could this be some kind of evolutionary response? The planet forcing us to adapt or die? That's what I thought initially. But the pattern doesn't match natural selection. Foster manipulated her display to show a complex genetic analysis. This is targeted modification. Precise. Systematic. Almost like... Like what? Like someone or something is editing our biology in real time. Before Rodriguez could respond, the settlement's early warning system activated. A series of modified volcanic vents that the humans had learned to read like a language. The pattern meant one thing: incoming threat. "All teams, defensive positions," Rodriguez called out over the general communications system. "Unknown contacts approaching from the eastern ridge." The settlement transformed in moments. Engineers became soldiers, scientists became sentries, and children disappeared into specially constructed shelters that had been burrowed deep into the living rock. Through the scope of her rifle, Rodriguez could see them approaching, not the familiar shapes of Edian's Rest's native predators, but something else entirely. Humanoid figures in powered armor that gleamed like polished mirrors, moving with the precision of a military unit. Their weapons were recognizable despite their alien design: directed energy weapons, electromagnetic projectile launchers, and what looked like atmospheric modification devices. "Confederation forces," Rodriguez breathed into her communicator. "They found us." The lead figure raised what was obviously a communication device and spoke in galactic standard, their words translated by the settlement's linguistic processors. "Human settlements of Edian's Rest. This is Task Force Cleansing Dawn of the Galactic Confederation Military Command. You are in violation of Class Omega planetary quarantine protocols. You will evacuate this world immediately or face immediate termination. Rodriguez felt a familiar sensation. The same cold fury that had carried her through the evacuation of Earth, the refugee convoy attacks and years of fighting for humanity's right to exist. "This is Commander Lila Rodriguez of the Terran Colonial Authority," she replied, her voice carrying across the settlement's external speakers. "We claim this world by right of settlement and successful colonization. We will not be moved." The Confederation forces began spreading out, taking positions around the settlement's perimeter. Their leader continued speaking, but now there was something different in their translated voice: uncertainty. "You cannot survive here," the voice said. "This is a death world. No species has ever successfully colonized a Class Omega environment. No species has ever tried," Rodriguez replied. Then, after a moment's pause, she added something that would be remembered in galactic history books for centuries to come. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" Task Force Cleansing Dawn Commander Vorthkus, 47th Expeditionary Force. Inside his environmental suit, Commander Vorthkus felt something his species hadn't experienced in over 2,000 years of peaceful existence. Genuine fear. Not fear of death, though the readings from Hadean's Rest were lethal enough to kill his entire unit in minutes if their protective systems failed. Not fear of failure, though his orders were clear and his resources adequate. Fear of the impossible. "Sir," reported his sensor operator, "Lieutenant Keltane, I'm reading massive biological inconsistencies from the human settlement." "Elaborate." "Their life signs. They're not wearing environmental protection, sir. They're breathing the atmosphere directly, and their thermal signatures." Lieutenant Keltane's voice trailed off as he checked his instruments again. "Sir, they're showing internal body temperatures that should indicate massive systemic failure. But they're moving normally, working normally, showing no signs of distress." Vorthkus manipulated his suit's external sensors to focus on the human settlement. What he saw challenged every principle of xenobiology he'd learned in 40 years of military service. Human children running between structures that were literally built on flowing lava. Human adults working with their bare hands on construction projects that should have required full environmental protection. And in the center of the settlement, smoke rising from what his translation systems identified as cooking fires. "They're preparing food," he whispered. "Sir? They're cooking on a Class Omega death world where the atmosphere should dissolve their lungs in minutes. These humans are preparing an evening meal." Through his suit's communication system, he could hear the human commander's voice again. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" It wasn't a surrender. It wasn't even a negotiation. It was an invitation. "Sir," Lieutenant Keltane reported. "Long-range sensors are detecting movement from the planetary interior. Multiple contacts. Very large, approaching our position." Vorthkus switched to thermal imaging and felt his circulatory system freeze. Moving through the volcanic landscape, creatures the size of buildings were approaching the settlement. Not attacking. Approaching. Like they were drawn by something. "The native fauna," he whispered. "They're being attracted to the human presence. Should we engage, sir?" Vorthkus watched as the massive creatures, things that looked like living mountains crossed with furnaces, slowed their approach as they neared the human settlement. And from the settlement he could see humans emerging. Not to fight or flee, but to greet the negative. Hold position. "I need to understand what I'm witnessing." Through his scope, he watched as Dr. Foster approached one of the creatures. A being that towered 20 meters above her and radiated heat that should have killed anything within 50 meters. She was carrying some kind of measuring device and what looked like food. The creature, one of the legendary thermic stalkers that had killed entire Confederation research teams, lowered its massive head toward the tiny human figure. She was feeding it. "Commander," came a new voice over his communication system. The human female who'd identified herself as Rodriguez was speaking directly to him. "I can see you're trying to figure out what you're looking at. Why don't you come down here and we'll show you?" "This is a trick," Lieutenant Keltane whispered. But Vorthkus was studying the readings from his atmospheric analyzers. Something impossible was happening. The air around the human settlement was becoming more breathable. Not by much, but measurably. The radiation levels were decreasing. The toxic compounds in the atmosphere were being converted to less harmful variants. The humans weren't just surviving on Hadean's Rest. They were changing it. Sir, orders? Commander Vorthcase looked at his unit, 60 of the Confederation's finest soldiers, equipped with the most advanced technology their civilization could produce, sent to eliminate a refugee population that had somehow accomplished the impossible. Signal the fleet, he said quietly. Tell them we need to reassess the situation. But even as he gave the order, Vorthcase knew that reassessment wasn't going to be enough. What was happening on Hadean's Rest would change the balance of power in the galaxy. The question was whether the Confederation would adapt or declare war on the species that had turned hell into a home. Settlement Alpha Mess Hall, evening of the same day. The dining hall was filled with sounds that had never been heard on a Deathworld: laughter, conversation, and the clink of eating utensils against salvaged metal plates. Around long tables made from polished volcanic glass, humans shared their evening meal: roasted thermic stalker steaks, vegetables grown in soil that had been deadly poisoned 3 weeks ago, and bread baked in ovens that used the planet's own geothermal energy. At the head table, Commander Rodriguez sat across from an empty chair, a place setting that had been prepared for their unexpected guest. Outside, Commander Vorthcase of the Galactic Confederation stood at the entrance to the mess hall, his environmental suit's sensors screaming warnings about atmospheric toxicity, radiation exposure, and biological contamination. Behind him, his unit maintained defensive positions, but their energy weapons were powered down, a gesture of cautious trust. The atmosphere will kill you if you remove your protective gear, Rodriguez called out to him. But we've got atmospheric processors running in the main hall. Not perfect, but breathable for most carbon-based species. Vorthcase consulted his suit's environmental readings. The atmosphere inside the human structure was indeed modified. Still toxic by galactic standards, but no longer immediately lethal. After a moment's hesitation, he stepped inside. The sight that greeted him would be seared into his memory for the rest of his very long life. 50 humans ranging in age from small children to elderly adults, sharing a meal that consisted primarily of creatures that could kill a Confederation soldier in seconds. They were talking, laughing, arguing about construction schedules and work assignments. Normal life lived in the most abnormal place in the known galaxy. Please. Rodriguez gestured to the empty chair. Join us. I see. My environmental suit. We've got atmospheric compatibility boosters, Dr. Foster said from across the table. Temporary modifications to help alien biology process the local air. Developed them when we realized we might have visitors. Vorthcase stared at her. You developed atmospheric modification technology. In 3 weeks, without industrial facilities. We're human? She replied with a shrug. We improvise. Against every regulation, every safety protocol, and every instinct his species had developed over millennia of careful existence. Commander Vorthcase reached for his helmet's release mechanism. Sir, came Lieutenant Kilthane's voice over his communication system. That's a direct violation. I know, Vorthcase replied, and removed his helmet. The air that filled his lungs was hot, sulfurous, and tasted like metal and smoke. But it was air. He was breathing the atmosphere of a Class Omega Deathworld, and he wasn't dying. Yet, how, he asked, his voice hoarse from the unfamiliar atmosphere. That's what we're trying to figure out, Rodriguez said, cutting a piece of what looked like steak from a creature that breathed fire. Near as we can tell, the planet doesn't want to kill us, it wants to test us. Deathworlds don't want anything. They're environmental hazards, not sentient beings. Foster leaned forward, her eyes bright with scientific excitement. That's what we thought too. But look at this. She activated a portable display device, showing real-time readings from across the settlement. The data revealed something that challenged everything Vorthcase thought he knew about planetary biology. The local ecosystem is adapting to our presence, Foster explained. Not competing with us, not trying to eliminate us. Adapting, like it's learning how to coexist with a new species. But the Confederation records show failed expeditions that tried to impose their biology on the planet. Rodriguez interrupted. We're not trying to change Hadean's Rest to suit us. We're changing ourselves to suit it. Vorthcase took a cautious bite of the offered food. It tasted like nothing he'd ever experienced. Smoky, complex, with flavors that seemed to change as he chewed. This is actually quite good, he admitted. "Thermic stalker," said Chief Kowalski, gesturing with his fork. "Trick is to cook it slow and low, let the natural heat cycle out of the meat. Too fast, and it'll burn right through your cooking equipment." "You're hunting thermic stalkers?" "They're hunting us too," laughed Sergeant Major Delgado. "Fair's fair." Vorthakes looked around the dining hall, trying to process what he was witnessing. These weren't the desperate refugees that the Confederation's files described. These were pioneers, colonists, people who had found a place where they belonged, no matter how impossible that place might be. "Commander," he said to Rodriguez, "I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer." "Shoot. How many of you are there, really?" Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, then gestured toward the walls of the dining hall. Through the transparent sections, Vorthakes could see lights scattered across the volcanic landscape, dozens of them, stretching to the horizon. 47,000 so far, she said. "But more are coming down from the fleet every day. Turns out when you offer people a chance to build something of their own instead of living as refugees, they take it. And you intend to stay here permanently?" "Commander Vorthakes," Rodriguez said, her voice carrying the weight of years spent fighting for her people's survival. "We've been homeless for 47 years, drifting between the stars, begging for scraps of habitable worlds that other species decided they didn't want, living on the charity and sufferance of civilizations that see us as a problem to be managed." She gestured around the dining hall. "Here, we're not refugees. We're not charity cases. We're home." Vorthakes felt his species equivalent of a chill run down his spine. The Confederation Council will never accept this. A primitive species successfully colonizing a Class Omega Deathworld, it undermines everything we thought we knew about galactic biology, planetary colonization, species hierarchy. "Then maybe," said a small voice from the end of the table, "the Confederation needs to learn something new." Everyone turned toward the speaker. A human child, perhaps 10 years old, her hair the color of copper and her eyes bright with intelligence that seemed far older than her years. "Amo," Rodriguez said gently, "remember what we talked about. Adult conversations. But it's not really an adult conversation, is it?" Emma interrupted, looking directly at Vorthakes. "It's about fear. The grown-ups in the Confederation are scared because we're doing something they can't do, living somewhere they can't live. And instead of asking us to teach them, they want to make us leave." Vorthakes stared at the child. In his species culture, young ones were protected, sheltered, kept away from dangerous ideas and complex problems, until they reached maturity. But this human child was speaking with a clarity that cut through everything he'd been trained to believe. "What would you teach us?" he asked. Emma smiled. The kind of smile that could melt glaciers or start revolutions. "That's scary. Places aren't always bad places. Sometimes they're just places that need friends." "Personal communication, Commander Vorthakes, to Fleet Admiral Korthaz, classification eyes only. Priority Admiral, I regret to inform you that the situation on Hadean's Rest is far more complex than our initial assessments indicated. The human population has successfully established not just survival infrastructure, but a functioning colonial society. Their technological adaptations, biological modifications, and cultural integration with the planetary ecosystem exceed anything in our xenosociological databases. More disturbing is their apparent symbiotic relationship with the local fauna. Species that have killed Confederation research teams are actively cooperating with human settlers. I personally observed a human child feeding a creature classified as a Class Alpha planetary threat. I am forced to conclude that the humans are not merely surviving on Hadean's Rest. They are transforming it, and in the process, they may be transforming themselves into something unprecedented. Request immediate consultation with the Confederation Council. Traditional containment protocols will not be sufficient for this situation. Additional note. They invited me to dinner. The food was surprisingly good. End transmission. Deep space. Hadean system. Confederation Fleet Nexus. Fleet Admiral Korvax read Commander Vorthakes' report for the fourth time, his multiple arms weaving patterns of confusion and concern as he tried to process the implications. Around him, The command bridge of the dreadnought Inevitable Consequence hummed with the quiet efficiency of a military operation preparing for something. The problem was, no one seemed entirely certain what that something should be. Analysis. Science coordinator, he asked. The biological data is unprecedented, Admiral, replied Science Coordinator Thelvix, her crystalline form flickering with patterns that indicated deep scientific distress. If the reports are accurate, the humans have achieved evolutionary adaptation rates that are theoretically impossible. They've also demonstrated technological innovation that rivals our most advanced research facilities, accomplished with salvaged materials and basic tools. Military assessment. General Corfin, the fleet's tactical commander, manipulated the holographic display to show detailed scans of the human settlements. 17 confirmed colonies, with sophisticated defensive positions and what appear to be weapons emplacements constructed from local materials. But Admiral, yes, they're not arranged for defense against external threats. They're arranged for protection against the local wildlife. Everything about their military positioning suggests they've successfully integrated their settlements into the planetary ecosystem. Admiral Korvax studied the tactical display, noting the patterns of human construction, the defensive positions, the locations chosen for each settlement. It was unlike anything in the Confederation's military databases. Not conquest, not terraforming, not even traditional colonization. It was adoption. Recommendations. We have 3 options, General Corfin replied. First, immediate orbital bombardment. Eliminate the human presence before they can establish a permanent foothold. Consequences. Unknown. We don't fully understand their relationship with the planetary ecosystem. Destroying the human settlements might trigger unpredictable responses from the local environment. Second option, blockade. Prevent additional human colonists from reaching the surface. Contain the existing population until they succumb to environmental factors. And if they don't succumb, General Korvath's form shifted in the equivalent of a shrug. Then we have a functioning human colony on a Class Omega Deathworld, which creates precedent issues. Third option, we negotiate. The command bridge fell silent. In 3,000 years of Galactic Confederation history, no major decision had ever been resolved through negotiation with a primitive species. The concept was almost literally unthinkable. Admiral, Science Coordinator Thelax interjected. There's something else. Long-range sensors are detecting similar activities in other Deathworld systems. The humans appear to be expanding. The holographic display shifted to show a 3-dimensional map of local space, scattered across the region. Other Class Omega systems showed signs of human activity, energy signatures, atmospheric modification, the telltale radiation patterns of active colonization. How many? Admiral Korvax asked quietly. 7 confirmed systems. Possibly more. They're moving faster than our ability to monitor them. Admiral Korvax felt something that his species had no word for. The recognition that the universe had fundamentally changed, and that all his training, all his assumptions, all his certainties were now obsolete. Signal the Confederation Council, he said. Inform them that we are no longer dealing with a refugee situation. What are we dealing with, Admiral? Korvax looked at the display showing human settlements thriving in environments that should have been instantly lethal, and realized that the answer would determine the future of galactic civilization. Evolution, he said. We're witnessing the birth of something entirely new. Settlement Alpha. Hadean's Rest 3 days later. The emergency alert echoed across the settlement at 0347 local time, dragging everyone from sleep into the kind of combat readiness that had become second nature during their weeks on Hadean's Rest. But this wasn't an attack from the local wildlife. This was something else entirely. Commander Rodriguez reached the command center in 90 seconds, still pulling on her boots as she reviewed the early warning displays. Report, she barked. Multiple contacts, approaching from the deep cavern systems. Sergeant Major Delgado reported. Large, moving in formation but not matching any of the known predator patterns. The thermic stalkers? Acid wraiths? Negative, ma'am. These are bigger. Much bigger. Rodriguez activated the settlement's external sensors, focusing them on the approaching contacts. What she saw on the display made her blood freeze. The hunger that walks. The creature, if it could be called a single creature, emerged from the volcanic caverns like a living nightmare given form. It was easily the size of a city block, its body a constantly shifting mass of what looked like molten rock, organic polymers, and something that might have been metal. Dozens of sensory appendages writhed from its central mass, each one larger than a human being. But it wasn't alone. Behind it, more shapes emerged from the planetary depths, creatures that had no names in any galactic database because nothing like them had ever been seen before. "Jesus Christ," whispered Dr. Foster, joining them in the command center. "It's beautiful." "Doc, that thing could eat our entire settlement and still be hungry for dessert," Chief Kowalski pointed out. "No," Foster said, studying her readings. "Look at the approach pattern. Look at the biochemical signatures." Rodriguez checked the displays. The massive creature was indeed approaching their settlement, but slowly, carefully. Its biochemical emissions weren't showing the aggressive compounds they'd learned to associate with hunting behavior. "It's curious," Foster continued. "It's investigating us. Can we communicate with it?" "Unknown," but Foster hesitated, then activated her personal communication device. There might be a way to find out. Before anyone could stop her, she was walking toward the settlement's main exit. "Foster," Rodriguez called out, "get back here." "Commander, with all due respect," Foster replied over her shoulder. "This is why I became a xenobiologist, to make first contact with something genuinely alien. And if it eats you—" Foster paused at the threshold between the safe, modified atmosphere of the settlement and the deadly environment of Hadean's Rest. "Then you'll know not to try feeding it." She stepped outside. First contact, Dr. Amanda Foster's personal log. "I'm approximately 50 meters from the largest life form ever catalogued by human science. I don't have adequate words. Imagine a mountain that learned to think, then decided to go for a walk. Its surface temperature is approximately 300 degrees Celsius, but there are patterns in the heat distribution that suggest some kind of internal organization. Not anatomy in any sense we'd understand. Structure. It's been watching our settlement for I don't know how long. Days, weeks. The intelligence behind those sensory clusters is unmistakable. This isn't just a predator or some kind of planetary immune response. This is the hunger that walks, and it's trying to decide what to make of us. I'm going to try to communicate." Foster deactivated her recording device and walked slowly toward the massive creature. With each step, the temperature increased. The air grew thicker and the very ground beneath her feet began to pulse with the rhythm of something vast and alien. When she was close enough to feel the heat radiating from its surface, the hunger that walks extended one of its sensory appendages toward her. The appendage was easily 3 times her height, covered in what looked like living crystal, and pulsed with internal light that shifted through colors that human eyes had no names for. Foster reached out and touched it. The contact sent a shock through both beings, human and alien, familiar and impossible. Carbon-based biology meeting something that existed at the intersection of life, geology, and pure thought. "Welcome," came a voice that wasn't really a voice, transmitted not through sound but through direct contact with her nervous system. "We have been waiting." "Waiting for what?" Foster asked aloud, not sure if the creature could understand human speech. "For someone who could survive the testing. The planet, our world, it has been lonely for so very long." The communication came in waves, each one carrying more information than Foster's conscious mind could process. Images, sensations, memories that stretched back millions of years. The history of Hadean's Rest told from the perspective of beings who had evolved alongside the planet itself. "Many came before you. All failed. All died. All became part of the world's memory." Foster saw flashes of the failed expeditions. Confederation research teams, military forces, scientific missions, all of them approaching the planet with the assumption that they needed to conquer it, control it, reshape it to their needs. "But you came to become part of us. To join the world's song instead of silencing it. Is that what we're doing?" Foster asked. "Joining?" "Yes, and in joining you make us stronger. Your kind brings new possibilities. New ways of being. New songs to add to the world's music." The creature's appendage pulsed with warm light, and Foster felt something happening to her body, not painful, not invasive, but educational. The hunger that walks was teaching her biology how to better interface with the planetary ecosystem. You will need this knowledge for what comes next. What comes next? But the hunger that walks was already withdrawing, its massive form sinking back into the volcanic caverns from which it had emerged. Its final communication came not as words but as pure concept, downloaded directly into Foster's consciousness. War. Settlement Alpha Command Center. 30 minutes later, Dr. Foster sat in the medical bay while the settlement's automated medical systems ran every diagnostic test in their database. Commander Rodriguez paced nearby, her expression shifting between relief, concern, and something approaching awe. "Your cellular structure has changed again," reported Chief Medical Officer Dr. Patricia Kim. "Enhanced thermal resistance, improved toxin processing, and—" She paused, checking her readings again. "Some kind of biological interface system. There are new neural pathways that didn't exist an hour ago." "I can feel it," Foster said quietly. "It's like having a new sense. I can feel the planet's heartbeat, the flow of thermal currents through the rock, the chemical composition of the atmosphere. And the creature? The hunger that walks. It's not a creature, not in the way we think of biology. It's more like the planet's nervous system given physical form. And it's been waiting for someone who could communicate with it without trying to dissect it." Rodriguez stopped pacing. "What did it tell you?" Foster was quiet for a long moment, processing memories that weren't entirely her own. "The Confederation is coming. Not just a task force or a research mission. They're bringing everything they have." "How does it know that?" "The planet is connected to things we can't imagine. Deep space monitoring networks, quantum communication arrays, probably the entire galactic infrastructure in ways that the Confederation doesn't even realize." Foster stood, her movements somehow more fluid than before. "Commander, we need to prepare, but not for the kind of war the Confederation is expecting." "What kind of war, then?" Foster smiled, and for a moment her eyes seemed to glow with the same internal light they'd seen in The Hunger That Walks. "The kind where we invite them to dinner and show them that there's more than one way to live in the universe." But even as she said it, Foster could feel something else in the planetary consciousness, an ancient hunger that had been growing for millions of years. The hunger that walks wasn't just the planet's nervous system. It was its immune system, and it was starting to think that the Galactic Confederation might be a disease that needed to be cured. In the depths of space, the largest military fleet in Confederation history was converging on the Hadean system. 500 ships, carrying weapons that could crack planets and technology that had maintained galactic peace for 3 millennia. But on the surface of Hadean's Rest, something equally unprecedented was stirring. 47,000 humans who had learned to make friends with hell itself, supported by a planetary consciousness that had been waiting eons for someone worth protecting. The barbecue war was about to become something that neither side had ever imagined. A conflict between those who sought to preserve the known universe and those who had chosen to evolve beyond it. The final battle would determine not just who controlled a single Deathworld, but what it meant to be alive in a galaxy full of infinite, impossible potential. Confederation Warfleet Nexus en route to Hadean System, 72 hours to target. The largest military armada in galactic history hung in the void like a constellation of death and precision. 500 vessels, their hulls reflecting the light of distant stars, each one carrying enough firepower to reduce entire star systems to cosmic dust. Fleet Admiral Korvax stood on the bridge of the command dreadnought Final Authority, reviewing tactical displays that showed the impossible situation awaiting them at Hadean's Rest. Around him, the greatest military minds of 43 species worked in harmony. The same harmony that had maintained galactic peace for over 3,000 years. Until now, long-range sensors confirmed 73 human settlements across Hadean's Rest, reported Tactical Coordinator Yithalran. Population estimates have reached 68,000 individuals, with more arriving daily from their fleet. Defensive capabilities. Unknown, Admiral. Their weapons appear to be constructed from local materials, but analysis indicates. Yethalran paused, checking his readings again. Admiral, their defensive systems are integrated with the planetary ecosystem itself. We're not just facing human military technology, we're facing the planet. Admiral Korvax manipulated the holographic display to show detailed scans of the largest human settlement. What he saw challenged every principle of military strategy he'd learned in 60 years of service. The humans hadn't built fortifications in the traditional sense. Instead, they'd created a symbiotic network of structures, natural formations and living systems that pulsed with the rhythm of the planet itself. Their defensive positions were volcanic vents that could be directed against incoming threats. Their weapon emplacements were grown from the same biometallic substances that comprised the local fauna. "How do you attack a position that's part of the world itself?" he whispered. "Admiral," came a new voice from the communication station. "We're receiving a transmission from the human settlement." "Put it through." The holographic display shifted to show Commander Rodriguez standing in what appeared to be a vast dining hall. Behind her, humans of all ages were engaged in what looked like preparations for a massive feast. The air shimmered with heat, and in the background, creatures that could kill a Confederation soldier in seconds moved peacefully among the human population. "Fleet Admiral Korvax. Rodriguez," and her voice carrying clearly across the void of space. "Welcome to Hadean's Rest. We've been expecting you, Commander Rodriguez. You are in violation of Galactic Confederation quarantine protocols. Evacuate your people from that world immediately, or we will be forced to use military action." Rodriguez smiled, the same smile that had gotten her through decades of impossible situations. "Admiral, with all due respect, you're thinking about this wrong. We're not violating anything, we're evolving. Deathworlds are designated as such for the protection of all galactic life. No species can survive long-term exposure to Class Omega environmental conditions. No species has survived," Rodriguez corrected. "There's a difference, and we'd like to invite you down to see what that difference means." The transmission showed the vast dining hall now filled with tables that stretched as far as the camera could see. Humans were preparing food on a scale that boggled the mind, not just for themselves but for thousands more. Admiral Rodriguez continued, "How long has it been since your people experienced something genuinely new? When was the last time the Confederation discovered something that challenged everything you thought you knew about life in the universe?" "This is not a philosophical discussion, Commander. This is a military operation." "Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like fear." Rodriguez gestured around the dining hall, where human children played among creatures that the Confederation had classified as weapons of mass destruction. "You've built a civilization based on avoiding risk, managing threats, controlling variables, and now you've encountered something you can't control, can't manage, can't understand." Admiral Korvax felt something his species had no adequate word for. The recognition that this conversation was more dangerous than any weapons array in his fleet. "What are you proposing?" he asked. "Come to dinner," Rodriguez said simply. "Bring your staff, bring your scientists, bring anyone who wants to understand what we've discovered here. We'll show you something that's never existed before in galactic history. And if this is a trap," Rodriguez laughed, genuine human laughter that echoed across the communication channel. "Admiral, we're 68,000 humans on a planet that was supposed to kill us all in minutes. If we wanted to hurt you, we'd probably start by dying dramatically and making you feel guilty about it. You cannot seriously expect—" "Admiral," the voice that interrupted belonged to Ambassador Zilf Nara, who had remained silent during the exchange. "Permission to speak freely? Granted. What do we actually know about what the humans have accomplished on Hadean's Rest? Our intelligence comes from long-range sensors and second-hand reports. We've never seen their society in operation, never observed their adaptation methods, never studied their integration with the planetary ecosystem." "Because it's impossible," General Korvan interjected. "The environmental conditions alone are being survived by 68,000 individuals, including children and elderly." Siltinara continued. "Either our understanding of Class Omega environments is fundamentally flawed, or we're witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history." Admiral Korvax studied the tactical display, weighing military doctrine against scientific curiosity. The humans had made no aggressive moves against Confederation forces. They demonstrated technological capabilities that exceeded expectations but hadn't used them offensively. And they were inviting 500 ships full of potential enemies to dinner. Convoy Group 7 will maintain defensive positions, he decided. Command staff and scientific personnel will accept the human invitation for cultural exchange. Sir, General Corfin protested, this violates every safety protocol. General Admiral Corvas interrupted, in 3,000 years of galactic peace, when was the last time we faced a situation that our protocols were designed to handle? The command bridge fell silent. Prepare a diplomatic shuttle, the Admiral ordered. It's time to see what humanity has been cooking. Settlement Alpha, Hadean's Rest. The Great Hall. The dining hall that Commander Rodriguez had constructed for this moment stretched across nearly a full kilometer of Hadean's Rest surface. The ceiling was a transparent dome that showed the planet's violent sky lightning that glowed like molten copper, storms that raged with the fury of stellar formation, and in the distance the twin moons rising over volcanic peaks that breathed fire into the alien night. Long tables filled the space, each one capable of seating both human and non-human guests. The table surfaces were polished volcanic glass that still retained the planet's internal heat, keeping the food warm while providing a constant reminder of where they were dining. Dr. Foster stood at the entrance greeting the arriving Confederation delegation with the enthusiasm of a scientist about to share the greatest discovery in galactic history. Admiral Corvas, she said as the military leader approached. His environmental suit modified with the atmospheric processors that had allowed Commander Vorth to breathe safely during his earlier visit. Welcome to Hadean's Rest. How do you find the atmosphere? Hot, the Admiral replied honestly, and somehow alive. That's exactly right. The atmosphere here isn't just a mixture of gases, it's part of a living system. The entire planet is essentially one vast organism, and we're learning to be part of it. Foster gestured toward the dining hall, where hundreds of humans were making final preparations for the feast. Tonight you're going to experience something that's never existed before. A meal prepared by humans using ingredients from a Class Omega Deathworld, designed to be enjoyed by multiple species in an environment that should be instantly lethal. Ambassador Zilthanara's form shifted with curiosity. How is this possible? Because, said a new voice, we stopped thinking of survival as avoiding death, and started thinking of it as embracing life. The speaker was a human child, the same copper-haired girl who had spoken during Commander Vorth's first visit. But now something was different about her. Her eyes held depths that seemed to reflect the planet's molten core, and when she moved, the very air around her shimmered with possibilities. Emma, Dr. Foster said gently, remember what we discussed about surprising our guests. But they need to understand, Emma replied, looking directly at Admiral Corvas. They're here to decide whether we're allowed to live or not. Shouldn't they know what living actually means? The Admiral felt a chill that had nothing to do with the atmospheric conditions. This child, this impossible, remarkable child, was speaking with the voice of someone far older and infinitely wiser than her appearance suggested. What does it mean? He asked quietly. Emma smiled and held out her hand. Come see. The feast begins. The meal that followed would be remembered in galactic history as the moment when everything changed. The first course was served by creatures that had previously been classified as Class Alpha planetary threats. Thermic stalkers, who moved among the dinner guests with careful precision, carrying plates of food that had been prepared using their own body heat. The sight of beings that could melt steel gently setting down dinner plates was surreal enough to challenge the sanity of every non-human present. The meat is from local predators, explained Chief Kowalski, serving Admiral Korvax a portion of something that glowed with internal heat. We've learned to hunt them sustainably, take only what we need, use every part of the animal and maintain the ecological balance. You're eating creatures that were designed to eat you, observed Science Coordinator Thelvix. Yeah, Kowalski grinned. Turns out they taste better than they fight. The second course consisted of vegetables grown in soil that had been volcanic ash 3 months ago. Dr. Foster explained the cultivation process while serving food that should have been impossible. The plants are hybrids, she said, placing a salad of impossible colors on Ambassador Zilthanara's plate. Part Earth species, part native Hadean flora. They've learned to process the local minerals and atmospheric compounds, converting toxins into nutrients. The evolutionary timeline for this kind of adaptation, began Thelevix, doesn't exist. Foster finished. Evolution is too slow for survival on Hadean's Rest. We had to learn to adapt in real time. And somehow we did. But it was the third course that truly shattered every assumption the Confederation delegation had brought with them. Served in bowls made from crystallized atmospheric compounds, it appeared to be some kind of soup, but as the guests watched, the liquid inside the bowls moved with purpose, shifting colors and textures in response to each diner's biological signatures. What is this? Admiral Korvax asked. The planet's gift, said Commander Rodriguez, taking her seat at the head of the long table. A few weeks ago, the hunger that walks, the planetary consciousness that you've classified as the most dangerous entity on this world, began producing this substance. Near as we can tell, it's designed to provide perfect nutrition for any carbon-based life form. The planet is cooking for us? The planet is welcoming us. All of us. Human Confederation, anyone who approaches with respect instead of conquest. Admiral Korvax stared at the substance in his bowl. It looked exactly like a soup his grandmother had made when he was young, a recipe that had been lost for centuries, that no one else could possibly know. He took a sip. The flavor was perfect. Not just familiar, but home. The taste of childhood, of safety, of belonging somewhere in the vast cold universe. Around the table, other members of the Confederation delegation were having similar experiences. Each bowl contained something that spoke to their deepest memories of comfort and nourishment. How? Whispered Ambassador Zilthanara. Because, said young Emma, her voice carrying the weight of impossible wisdom. The planet doesn't want to hurt anyone. It just wants to not be alone anymore. The truth revealed. As the meal progressed, the conversation gradually shifted from diplomatic formalities to something more profound. The environmental barriers between human and alien began to dissolve, not just the atmospheric differences, but the conceptual ones. For 3,000 years, Admiral Korvax found himself saying, the Confederation has maintained peace through control. We identify threats, contain them, eliminate them if necessary. It's worked, has it? Asked Dr. Foster. Or has it just created a galaxy full of species that are afraid to try anything new? Stability requires stagnation, interrupted Commander Rodriguez. Admiral, when was the last time any Confederation species made a genuine breakthrough, discovered something that changed how they understood the universe, encountered a challenge that forced them to grow? The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. We have achieved a remarkable degree of harmony among diverse species. You've achieved a remarkable degree of sameness, Rodriguez corrected. Everyone thinking the same thoughts, making the same assumptions, following the same rules. But life isn't about following rules. Life is about writing new ones. And if those new rules are dangerous, if they threaten the stability we've built, then you adapt, said Emma simply. That's what living things do. As if to demonstrate her point, Emma stood and walked to the transparent wall that showed Hadean's Rest's violent landscape. But as she approached, something remarkable happened. The volcanic activity began to calm. The lightning softened. The very air seemed to grow still with respectful attention. The planet isn't dangerous because it wants to hurt people, she explained, her small hand pressed against the transparent barrier. It's dangerous because it's been alone for so long that it forgot how to be gentle. But it's learning. We're teaching it, and it's teaching us. Science Coordinator Thelvix activated her portable scanner, taking readings of the child's biological signature. What she saw made her crystalline form flicker with patterns of deep amazement. The integration is complete, she whispered. This child isn't just human anymore, she's something new. We're all something new, Rodriguez said quietly. That's what happens when you stop trying to impose your will on the universe and start learning to dance with it. Admiral Korvax felt the foundations of his worldview crumbling like sand castles in a storm. Everything the Confederation had taught him about life, survival, and civilization was being challenged by the simple existence of these impossible people in their impossible home. What do you want from us? He asked. Nothing, Rodriguez replied. But we have something to offer you. Which is? The chance to remember what it feels like to be truly alive. The choice. As the feast drew to a close, The reality of the situation settled over both humans and Confederation delegates like a blanket of stars. Outside the dining hall, a military fleet waited in orbit. Weapons that could end this remarkable experiment in seconds. Inside, children played games that involved befriending creatures from nightmares, while adults discussed the future of galactic civilization. The Council will never accept this, Admiral Korvac said quietly to Commander Rodriguez, as they walked through the settlement's main thoroughfare. Around them, the night shift was beginning their work, humans and native creatures working together to expand the colony's infrastructure. Why? Rodriguez asked. Because it proves that their way isn't the only way. Because it threatens the fundamental principles upon which our civilization is built. Order, predictability, the containment of dangerous variables. And what if those principles are wrong? The Admiral stopped walking and turned to face her. Then 3,000 years of galactic peace have been built on a lie. Not a lie, Rodriguez corrected. Just incomplete truth. You've created a wonderful civilization, Admiral. Safe, stable, peaceful. But you've also created a galaxy where no one dreams of impossible things anymore. They stood in silence for a moment, watching human children chase fireflies that glowed with the heat of small suns, while their parents worked alongside creatures that could dissolve steel with their breath. If we report this to the Council, Admiral Korvac said finally, they will order the complete sterilization of this system. They cannot allow the precedent to stand. And if you don't report it, then I become complicit in the greatest challenge to Confederation authority in galactic history. Rodriguez smiled. Sounds exciting. Commander, you don't understand the magnitude of what you're asking. The economic disruption alone, if other species begin abandoning established colonies to seek out their own Deathworlds, then maybe they'll find their own ways to be truly alive instead of just safely existing. Before Admiral Korvac could respond, an alarm began sounding throughout the settlement. But this wasn't the familiar warning of local predator activity. This was something else entirely. Commander, came Sergeant Major Delgado's voice over the communication system. We've got a problem. Long-range sensors are detecting massive energy buildup from the Confederation fleet. Rodriguez and the Admiral looked at each other with the shared understanding of military personnel who recognized the sound of an approaching storm. They're preparing to fire, Admiral Korvac said quietly. Without your authorization? The Council must have issued a direct override. Total sterilization of the system, regardless of casualties. Rodriguez felt a familiar cold fury building in her chest. How long do we have? 6 hours. Maybe 7. The orbital bombardment platforms need time to achieve target lock through the atmospheric interference. Then we'd better get ready to show them what a real barbecue war looks like. The last battle. Settlement Alpha Command Center, T-4 hours to orbital bombardment. The command center had been transformed into something that resembled a military nerve center crossed with a nature preserve. Human technical officers worked alongside native creatures, whose biological systems had been integrated into the settlement's communication networks. The displays showed tactical information, but they also pulsed with the living rhythms of Hadean's rest itself. Fleet positions confirmed, reported communications specialist Morrison. 500 ships in standard orbital bombardment formation. Energy signatures indicate planet killer-class weapons. Our defensive capabilities? Asked Commander Rodriguez. Well, said Chief Engineer Kowalski, consulting readings from instruments that seemed to be part technology and part living tissue. The good news is that we've got the entire planet on our side. The bad news is that our friends up there have enough firepower to crack continents. Dr. Foster looked up from her biological monitoring station. Planetary consciousness is agitated. The hunger that walks and its related entities are responding to the threat, but I'm not sure they understand what they're up against. Can we communicate with them? I've been trying, but their concept of defense might not align with our survival needs. Through the command center's transparent walls, they could see the settlement's human population continuing their daily activities with the kind of determined normalcy that had carried them through 47 years of homelessness. Children attended school in classrooms that used volcanic vents for heating. Adults worked on construction projects that would take decades to complete. The elderly sat in gardens where impossible flowers bloomed in soil that had been poisoned 3 months ago. No one was running. No one was hiding. No one was giving up. You know, Rodriguez said quietly, watching her people face potential annihilation with the courage of those who had already survived the impossible. I think the Confederation may have made a tactical error. How so? Asked Admiral Corvax, who had remained with the human settlement as his fleet prepared to destroy it. They're assuming this is about territory, or resources, or even survival, Rodriguez replied. But it's not. It's about family. As if to prove her point, the settlement's early warning system activated, not with the harsh mechanical alarms they'd used during their first weeks on Hadean's Rest, but with a sound like music. The living alarm system had evolved into something that communicated through harmony rather than discord. What is it? Admiral Corvax asked. Company, said Dr. Foster, studying her readings with growing amazement. Very, very large company. Through the command center's dome they could see the horizon changing. What had appeared to be mountain ranges were moving, shifting, rising, approaching the human settlement with the ponderous majesty of geological time accelerated to biological speed. The hunger that walks wasn't alone anymore. The entire planetary consciousness was awakening, stirring to defend the strange new family that had learned to call hell home. Admiral, Rodriguez said quietly, you might want to contact your fleet and suggest they reconsider their targeting priorities. But Admiral Corvaxers was already reaching for his communication device, his multiple arms trembling as he realized the magnitude of what they had all stumbled into. This wasn't a colonization mission that had gone wrong. This wasn't even a military conflict between competing civilizations. This was the moment when a planet that had been waiting millions of years for companionship finally found someone worth protecting. And it was about to show the Galactic Confederation what true power looked like. Confederation Fleet Nexus, T-2 hours to bombardment. General Corfatin stood before the tactical display on the bridge of the Final Authority, watching as his careful bombardment calculations became increasingly meaningless. The surface of Hadean's Rest was changing. Energy readings are off the scale, reported Sensor Coordinator Vilsex. The entire planetary crust appears to be mobilizing. Geological formations are exhibiting behavior patterns consistent with life. Explain. Sir, mountain ranges are moving. Volcanic chains are repositioning themselves. The planet's magnetic field is fluctuating in ways that suggest conscious control. Admiral Horvan manipulated the display to show real-time scans of Hadean's Rest. What he saw challenged not just his understanding of military tactics, but his comprehension of what constituted life in the universe. The entire planet was awakening. Continental shelves shifted like the breathing of some impossibly vast creature. Volcanic activity increased and decreased in rhythmic patterns. The atmosphere itself seemed to pulse with purposeful intention. Sir, came a trembling voice from the communication station. We're receiving a transmission from Admiral Corvax on the surface. Put him through. The holographic display showed the Admiral standing in what appeared to be the human command center. But he was not alone. Surrounding him were shapes that defied easy description. Beings that looked like they'd been carved from living mountain ranges. Creatures that glowed with the heat of stellar cores. And in the center of it all, a small human child with copper hair and eyes that held the depth of geological time. General Corfaz, Admiral Corfax said, his voice carrying a weight that spoke of revelations too large for normal communication. Abort the bombardment. Immediately. Admiral, the Council's orders are clear. The Council's orders are based on incomplete information. What we're dealing with here isn't a refugee population that's violated quarantine protocols. What we're dealing with is… He paused, looking around at the impossible gathering of beings. First contact with the intelligence that spans an entire world. The child stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice was carried simultaneously through the communication system and through channels that bypassed technology entirely, direct transmission to the consciousness of every being in the Confederation fleet. Hello, Emma said, and her greeting echoed through 500 ships like the voice of planets speaking to the void. We've been waiting to meet you. Every member of the Confederation fleet felt that greeting as a physical sensation. Warmth, welcome, curiosity, and underneath it all, power that dwarfed stellar formation. We know you're frightened, the child continued, her mental voice encompassing concepts too large for verbal language. The humans were frightened too when they first came to us. But fear is just loneliness wearing a different face. General Corvin felt his species' equivalent of tears beginning to form as he finally understood what he was witnessing. This wasn't a military threat to be neutralized. This wasn't even a diplomatic crisis to be managed. This was the universe offering them a gift. The chance to be part of something larger than the careful, controlled existence they'd built among the stars. All ships, he transmitted across the fleet's communication network, stand down from bombardment positions. We are no longer conducting a military operation. Sir? Came confused voices from across the fleet. We're accepting a dinner invitation. The New Dawn, Settlement Alpha. Hadean's Rest 1 year later. The Great Hall had been expanded 17 times in the past year, each edition incorporating new architectural techniques that blended human engineering with the living geology of Hadean's Rest. The current structure could accommodate over 10,000 diners, representing 47 different species from across the galaxy. The Commander Rodriguez, now Administrator Rodriguez, of the Hadean Colonial Authority, stood at the entrance to the hall greeting the newest group of visitors. They were Horth-Keel warriors, the same species that had once considered Deathworlds to be the ultimate test of military prowess. Now they came not to conquer, but to learn. Administrator, said their leader, a grizzled veteran, whose scars told the story of 100 battles. Our young ones wish to understand how your people achieved victory over this world. Rodriguez smiled, gesturing toward the dining hall where human children played games with creatures that had once been classified as weapons of mass destruction. We didn't achieve victory. We achieved friendship. The distinction is, victory implies that someone loses. Friendship means everyone wins. The Horth-Keel warrior studied the scene before him. Humans, aliens, and planetary consciousnesses racing together to create something that had never existed before. And this, friendship, can be lived, Rodriguez replied, which is why you're here. Inside the hall, Dr. Foster was presenting her latest research to a gathering of scientists from 12 different species. The data she shared would revolutionize galactic understanding of biology, consciousness, and the nature of life itself. Symbiotic evolution, she explained, gesturing toward displays that showed the genetic changes occurring in all species that lived on Hadean's Rest for extended periods. Instead of species adapting to environments, we have environments and species adapting to each other in real time. The planet learns from its inhabitants, and the inhabitants learn from the planet. The implications for colonization, began a crystalline researcher, are staggering, Foster agreed. But more importantly, the implications for consciousness itself. We're discovering that intelligence isn't limited to individual organisms. It can emerge at planetary scales, galactic scales, perhaps universal scales. In another part of the hall, Chief Engineer Kowalski was teaching a mixed group of human and alien children how to build structures that incorporated living geological systems. Their latest project was a playground that used controlled volcanic activity to create slides, swings, and climbing structures that would have been impossible anywhere else in the galaxy. The trick, he explained to his young students, is to remember that we're not building on the planet. We're building with it. But the most remarkable sight was at the center of the hall, where Emma, now 11 years old, but carrying the wisdom of geological ages, sat in conversation with representatives from the Galactic Confederation Council. They had come to Hadean's Rest as skeptics and potential enemies. They were leaving as converts to a new way of existing in the universe. The old Confederation was built on fear, Emma was saying, her voice carrying the harmonics of planetary consciousness alongside the clarity of human speech. Fear of change, fear of risk, fear of anything that couldn't be controlled or predicted. That fear makes you small. It makes you less than what you could be. And what should replace fear? Asked High Counselor Thickamarian. Emma smiled, and her smile reflected the joy of rivers running through molten rock, the satisfaction of mountains growing from the sea, the contentment of ecosystems finding perfect balance. Wonder, she said simply. The universe is full of impossible things. Instead of being afraid of them, maybe we should be excited to discover what's possible. 5 years after first contact, the barbecue war had ended not with conquest but with expansion. Across the galaxy, what had started as humanity's desperate search for a home had become something far more significant, proof that the universe was larger, stranger, and more welcoming than anyone had dared to imagine. 17 Class Omega Deathworlds now hosted thriving colonies. Each one was different. Each one required different adaptations, and each one taught its inhabitants something new about the nature of life, consciousness, and community. The Galactic Confederation still existed, but it had transformed from a mechanism for maintaining control into a network for sharing discoveries. Species that had lived in careful isolation for millennia were venturing out to explore the impossible. The galaxy was becoming a more dangerous place, and a more alive one. Dr. Foster, now Director of Planetary Consciousness Studies at the University of Impossible Things, established in the caldera of Hadean's Rest's largest volcano, published her final report on the transformation. What we discovered on Hadean's Rest was not a new form of colonization, but a new form of existence. When we stopped trying to make the universe conform to our expectations and started learning to dance with its infinite complexity, we discovered that the universe had been waiting for dance partners all along. The old model of survival, avoid risk, control variables, maintain predictability, created a galaxy full of species that had forgotten how to grow. The new model, embrace uncertainty, adapt constantly, build relationships rather than defenses, is creating something unprecedented. A universe that gets more interesting every day. The barbecue war was never about food, though the meals were remarkable. It was about choosing to live fully in a universe that offers infinite possibilities to those brave enough to say yes to them. And we're just getting started. On a small blue-green world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, a memorial stood in the ruins of humanity's first homeworld. The inscription, written in languages from across the galaxy, read simply, "They left to find a place where they could live. They found instead a way to make the whole universe more alive. And in the depths of space, where new stars were born from cosmic dust and impossible dreams took root in the hearts of beings who had learned to call hell home, the greatest adventure in galactic history was just beginning." The table was always expanding. There was always room for one more. The universe, it turned out, was hungry for friends.